I think they're racing as we speak. It's this your last part of the sentence that they hate, because at the end of the day, it's actually pretty expensive stuff to develop.
It is.
And it is reaching the edges of physics as we understand it. Right?
But you know, there's something very interesting going on. You know, if you were successful in a business in the 1950s or something like that, you might sell 1 million units. Okay? I mean, there's 1.5 billion cell phones made every year. Okay? So it's possible now in markets, if you're successful. I mean, for example, our wireless combo chips are in most smartphones out there right now. I mean, we sell hundreds of millions of those a year. We sell more than 1 million a day of those devices. And so there's the opportunity to have a quantity that was never before possible in the human species, because you could never create something that would sell in those volumes before. You couldn't market it. You couldn't find a way to do that. And so that kind of volume, you know, even if you get $1 for it times 1 billion, that's an interesting number.
But that's precisely where this word of scale and the question of, you know, are we entering a phase of winner-takes-all markets is starting to become a worry to the smaller companies, or an opportunity for M&A suite?
Well, I think it's definitely getting harder for small companies in the semiconductor industry. I think the trend of integration is making it harder because, you know, they don't have all the pieces to put the puzzle together. I think the cost of doing a chip has gone up. I mean, we average about $30, $35 million on average for every chip we develop. That's our cost, you know, to get the first one out. And, you know, that's a lot of money for a VC to put up to get a chip that might or might not sell.
Sure.
And so I think that does make it harder for smaller companies. And so I imagine we'll have chipless companies, not just fabless companies, but chipless companies going forward, where they'll develop really interesting core IP blocks. It's a little harder to IPO on that, but then you can get a very good M&A exit, you know, if you've got a really good IP block.
Well, the alternative is actually another form of integration, which is, you know, 3D ICs in terms of SiPs, right? Systems in a package. And of course, it's being proposed that just stacking them vertically, which is really hard to do, thermal issues and so on. But the other thing is on silicon interposer, where you can certainly bring things more closely together. You can have hybrid systems, digital, analog, sensors, and so on. What is Broadcomm's thinking about that whole area? Do you see that as an opportunity?
I think a SIP is something you do if you can't figure out how to integrate it.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
You know, there are times when you would do a SIP because, you know, you've got multiple process technologies, you've got super high voltage or high power, or you didn't have time to put it together. But if you can put it together, you should, because you'll save packaging, you'll save power, you'll save, you know, total cost.
Absolutely true. On the other hand, earlier you gave a whole set of examples where by definition there are sensors coming in. With other words, you know, all this compute power and communication power needs to be applied to something. And the something is not just one more pad, right? It is now devices that interact with the real world. So one would expect that there would be more hybrid integration.
I think so. You know, there are a lot of things that are just hard to integrate, and, you know, they will over time. I mean, we've demonstrated you can integrate radios and analog and power amplifiers and audio. You can integrate all that stuff with standard CMOS, and we've got a team who are really smart at doing that. But, you know, when you get to some of the MEMS things that have just very deep aspect on that, or you have something that connects to an old telephone wire and needs to have a 100-volt process on it or something like that, that's hard to integrate, or something that, you know, controls your electric car. And, you know, for example, a Tesla motor, for example, is 400 volts and 700 amps. Okay, that probably doesn't work in our standard processes.
We'll have big packages for sure, yes. So the bottom line is you're still integrating an enormous amount of intellectual property, increasingly also vertically integrated in value chains with partners. And yes, there's a bit of feeling of winner takes all, or the big winners will win big. And one of the results is suddenly a wave of litigation among companies. I mean, you can see it right now among some of the people around pads, around some of the operating systems. What does that tell you?
There is a food fight going on in the industry right now around patents, and I don't think it's very healthy. And there's sort of two pieces to that. One is you have a lot of newcomers coming into the cellular business, and there used to be sort of an old order of who paid who what, and you get all these newcomers coming in, and they don't play by those rules. And so the newcomers and the entrenched guys are all suing each other left and right. And my guess is that food fight's going to get worse before it gets better.
But is this one of those mutually assured destruction? Let's just make sure you have your 5,000 patents, and the other guy has 5,000.
Well, I think what you're going to see. I think what you're going to see is Company A can't sell in Australia. Company B gets enjoined from Germany, and I think eventually they'll work it out. But that needs to sort out. They will work that out over time. I'm pretty confident of that. But also in the United States, we have a problem in that now you can make more money investing money in a lawyer and a patent than building cool stuff.
Oh, but that's a different story. We'll get to that in just a sec. Just a sec. Yeah, hold that for. We'll get to that. I was aiming right now more at this massive amount of warfare, which seems like it's an unstable state.
I think it's a transitional state.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's transitional because eventually the old entrenched guys, will settle with the new guys, and they'll work it out, and money will flow, and patents will get cross-licensed. And
so Google buys Motorola. They buy it for the patents, or they actually want to do something with it?
Well, I'm not privy to their inner thinking, but I think there are a couple schools of thought. One school of thought is they bought it for the patents. The other school of thought is they have Cupertino envy. Okay, and they want to replicate that model, and I think it'll be interesting. The public statements are that they aren't going to advantage the Motorola business that they acquired in any way versus the other partners, and that's more the Microsoft model. So they have to decide whether they want the Microsoft model or the Cupertino model, okay, and they'll have to choose. If they choose the Microsoft model, they'll have to watch the internal group not get any advantage, and those are going to be painful earnings calls. Okay, and I think if they go the other way, all of the customers who would buy Android are going to say, wait a minute, this isn't a level playing field, not what I signed up for.
Is the same true between foundries and integrated companies?
Between foundries and integrated foundries, sorry.
Samsung.
I think Samsung is an interesting company. They're vertically integrated, and they're also trying to sell crosswise. And I think it's a big challenge, how you both develop chips and run a foundry business and are a customer. And they'll have to feel their way through that. It's not an impossible problem to solve, but it's certainly more difficult than if they were disaggregated.
Intel, same thing?
I think Intel has more of a challenge. I think Intel is viewed as pretty much a vertically integrated company, and they're now looking at the possibility of foundry business. I think it'd be very hard for us to consider Intel as a viable foundry for us. We consider them more as a competitor. So that one's a tough one. I don't think that one's ambiguous to us.
No. I assume it's not ambiguous. I think all of these are interesting cases for an entire industry that is solely in rapid movement, and that is actually not determined. People collect patents, and they go to you and say, hey, just give me 5% of every chip, and then you fine for my patents. Of course, it doesn't add up, right?
Well, here's the problem. I mean, if you take something like a cell phone or smartphone, there's probably at least hundreds of thousands of patents that apply to that, and maybe as much as 1 million patents. And we have this model today where you get patent trolls or non-practicing entities, I think is the preferred term, trolls. And they believe, for example, that they should get 5% of the value of that device. And 5% times 1 million is
so it doesn't add up.
More than 100, I think.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a problem. I think we will either need legislative change, or consumers are going to find that the cost of these devices absolutely explode, because we've had to pay a lot of settlements for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to get some of these.
So the second can happen, because the cost cannot explode, then the customers won't be able to afford it. So what legislation is going to happen?
Well, we have to work on that. We are very interested in that subject, and we've been working with some of our peers in the industry to try and see what we can do there.
Yeah, I just remember that in the late 80s, there was this wave of frivolous lawsuits, and a number of organizations, at that time not GSA, but others, were focused on ultimately getting that somewhat out of the way. This has similar type of characteristics, but it's very well funded.
It isn't just legislation, though. What we find, and I think is true, is that both courts try to do the right thing. Judges try to do the right thing, and juries try to do the right thing. I mean, if they believe that things are going the wrong way, in these suits, they will find in favor of what makes sense for the community values. Okay, and at some point, that also plays into this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's no question that it's very expensive once you're involved in any of those, and most of us will just do a few.
And as I said before, it does not make sense for somebody to make more money more easily by buying up patents and suing everybody than making cool stuff. Okay, that just to me is not a good recipe for the country.
So switching topics a little bit to Switching topics a little bit to your tenure at Broadcom. By every metric, I think you have chalked up extraordinary success. Of course.
Well, it's not a single person; it's a team.
Yeah, I know. But you are the guy sitting here, not the whole team. And
I represent the team.
Yeah. I was just trying to give you a compliment here. So
I'm trying to compliment the team.
Yeah, it's hard
I'm trying to compliment the team.
But actually, the fact is, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of members of your team, some that you don't even know about, and one of the things that struck me was a couple of things that are actually a very positive indicator. One is people are proud of the company. Secondly, there's a high degree of cultural coherence. And third, there's a very high degree of belief that technology really matters. And for whatever it's worth, I think that is a very good sign, because coherence in a company over a long time actually aligns the team, gives them the right impetus to move forward. You joined at a time where maybe there was a little bit of a colored history. What did you do to actually build the team that it is today? You know, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can share?
I think one of the things you need to do with a company that grows, we're now 10,000 employees, and we were about a quarter of that when I started. And one of the challenges for any company as it gets larger is managing the scalability of the company and making sure, in our case, Broadcomm has always been good at execution. But what you want to do is make sure that as it scales, you don't break that, okay, yet you also can put the necessary things in that you need in a larger company. And for me as a CEO, that's been one of the things I worry most about. How do you keep the company feeling like a startup or a flotilla of startups or whatever, and still scale and you know, have integrity and have solid processes and do all of that? And I think that's, you know, that's really the job of a CEO of a company that's growing, is to make sure you can manage that. And I think pushing down responsibility, making sure that teams feel that they own their products. I see a couple of Broadcomm folks in the audience here, but you know, those people who own those businesses, they need to feel like they really own them. They get to make the decisions on what products they have, their roadmap, what customers they work with, pricing, and pushing that down in the organization and creating an infrastructure that makes that work is really important.
Empower the team.
And not try to do everything centrally and not try to have me make all the decisions. I don't think that works.
And make sure that they're provided some of those extraordinarily valuable EDA tools that make
Absolutely, absolutely. Those two.
So maybe just turning for a second to the home front. You know, we haven't had the opportunity to talk much about economy, politics, and the world changes. You know, all of these things. You at the same time see the impact of running a company. You know, fundamentally, what do you tell your kids? What do you want your kids to learn?
Go into biotech.
Go into biotech. Okay.
No, I mean,
I was hoping for something a little deeper.
No. Look, I think I mean, my family, for example, are very passionate about technology, and I think technology plays such a fundamental role. And I think we heard it, you know, earlier today that, you know, if it weren't for technology, there wouldn't be a lot of these other things. Semiconductors is such an enabler of all the devices that are out there and all of how we do business these days, and the cars we drive. I mean, your clothes wouldn't be made if it weren't for the automated looms that are doing all this stuff. I mean, everything we depend on at some point comes from semiconductors. I think there's a very robust future for us to continue to innovate, and so I don't see that.
So when you give your kids that speech, they don't go, "Oh, Dad, you know, not the tech thing again."
My kids are into tech.
Into tech.
Well, they like gadgets.
Very cool.
They like stuff.
So maybe last closing question. I know you have, you know, in 2 minutes a police escort to get you to the airport in time. You know, looking back 5 years, 10 years, back on Broadcomm from now, what would you love to see as Scott's legacy on that company?
I think anybody in a company, and we just had, of course, you know, Steve Jobs passed the other day, and nobody can beat that. That's a pretty amazing record he had. But I think anybody running a company has to look back and what did you do that made it better as a result of what you did? And I think that's important. For me, I would say that I wanted the company to take risks. Going into the cellular business, for example, 1,000 engineers, no revenue, 5 years, painful on the P&L. You know, but big risks, long-term bets on strategy, I think, are important if you're running a company. I think establishing a culture, establishing both a culture that we can be a big company, but also an agile, aggressive company and not lose any of what Broadcomm has always had historically, and that we can do it with integrity and with something that makes all of our customers and our suppliers and all the team who works with us proud to work with us, as our employees are to work with us.